when I have my glasses in my pocket, don't be wondering why does he have them in his pocket. They're broke. And so if I have to put them on, I will. But if not, I'm going to try to get by without them tonight. So we finished last week. We finished our study of angels and demons. And, it just so happened we had this week gap here between what that class and what we're going to be doing during Camp Friendship. So I decided to kind of add a class to our Camp Friendship classes. And they're going to be a bit about being empowered by Jesus. And I'll just give you a quick rundown of the classes that we'll be studying, or the things we'll be studying over the next few weeks. The first night, or next Wednesday night, we'll be talking about the paralytic that was brought to Jesus by his friends in Mark chapter 2. We will talk about the week after that, the Battle of Jericho in Joshua chapters 5 and 6. We'll look at Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth, Gideon, and Judges chapters 6 and 7. And we'll finish up with Saul of Tarsus in Acts chapter 9, the conversion of Saul. So those are the classes that we'll be doing over the next few weeks. Tonight, go ahead and open your Bibles to Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, we're going to begin with verse 1. And we're going to look at people that had great faith. And not just great faith as I would judge great faith, but people that Jesus said had great faith. Wouldn't you love to have Jesus say that about you? And there are some people in Jesus' ministry that he made specific comments about in regard to the level or the greatness of those people's faith. And I want us to look at some of those this evening. Here in Luke chapter 7, beginning with verse 1, it says, "When he had completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum." Now, just to give us some contextual background here, the discourse mentioned seems to be the Sermon on the Mount. And he was probably preached that sermon on Mount Arbel. You can stand on Mount Arbel and kind of look out. It's very high above the Sea of Galilee, and you can look out across there and you can see Capernaum out there. And it's about 3 miles away. And so he finishes preaching the Sermon on the Mount, and he returns to Capernaum, which is really his center, kind of his home base for his ministry throughout his ministry. Capernaum and the surrounding area was where the vast majority of Jesus' ministry takes place. In fact, a super vast majority. And the majority of his miracles take place in that region as well. Well, verse 2 says, "And a centurion's slave, who was highly regarded by him, was sick and about to die." Now, the description of this in Matthew chapter 8 and verse 6, in that account, as Matthew talks about this same event, the man says, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented." So it's not an easy sickness. It's not, just a weak sickness. This is a terrible sickness that is causing a great deal of pain for the servant of this centurion. We need to understand when we think about the slave-master relationship that the first century world was a slave world. And there were several ways that one could become a slave. You could be taken through a defeat in war. So, if you roll up to AD 70, one of the ways that the armies made their money was, say, you conquer the city of Jerusalem and you take the healthy people and you enslave them and you sell them, and that's how the army makes money from the wars that they wage. And so that went on quite a bit in the world of that day. Some were captured by, I guess, without a better word, pirates, as a result of attacking ships. There were self-made slaves, those that sold themselves into slavery because of a debt that they owed. And this is very prevalent in the first century. There are those that were slaves because they were sentenced in a court to become slaves because of a debt that they owed and could not repay. There were those that were, if they found an unwanted child that was left to die, that child would be placed into the slave world. And a child that was born to a slave mother would also be a slave. But they would have the opportunity. Those that were born into slavery would have the opportunity to be freed by the time that they were 30 years of age. And treatment varied. I don't think you could ever say that, it was always good for everybody, because certainly based on your master was going to determine a lot, just as it would in any situation. But it is considered that during this time that most slaves were treated fairly well. They weren't all, I think we have an idea from our own history as to slavery, but it probably was a bit different than what we might think in regard to that. Slaves were indistinguishable from free men in the city or the market, because they often did the same jobs. Slaves weren't just doing menial labor. Slaves were working the shops. They were in the marketplaces. They were shopping for their master. They were very engaged in day-to-day societal life. Many were highly educated. Many served as teachers and tutors for the children of the master. Sometimes had a greater education and, say, an understanding of philosophy and things of that nature than the master had. And so, you would see them in those kind of roles as well. Slaves could also own their own slaves. I found that kind of interesting when I came across that in the first century world, sometimes there were slaves that a slave owed them a debt. Well, remember Jesus' parable, right? The story that he told about the man that owed so much to the king, and the king forgave it, right? And he never could repay it. He went out and he found another slave that owed him, and he had him thrown in prison. That's what we're talking about. But instead of being thrown in prison, sometimes they would become the slaves of a slave. Slavery was a reality throughout the Bible. Abraham had slaves. In fact, before Ishmael and before Isaac, Abraham said, the only person I have is a servant that was born in my house to be my heir, Eleazar. And so, we see that going back into those times. It existed within the Mosaic Law. In fact, the Mosaic Law gives certain regulations in regard to slavery. Slavery existed as well within the membership of the New Testament church, did it not? The Book of Philemon is a book all about a slave and his master, right? Philemon was the master, a very strong member of the Lord's church, a person that was very close to the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul had come across a runaway slave that happened to belong to Philemon. And he wanted him to take him back without punishment, to take him back as a Christian brother. Paul said, I want you to understand, you're not just getting a slave back, you're getting a brother back. And Paul even says, if he's done you any wrong, if he's cost you anything, you put that on my tab, right? On my bill. I'll pay that. And so we see Paul there trying to work that relationship back into a right relationship between Onesimus and Philemon. In the books of Ephesians, Colossians, 1 Timothy, Titus, and 1 Peter, every single one of those books gives guidance to the Lord's church in how to regard and how to deal with the master-slave relationship within the congregation. And so, we see that the New Testament certainly deals with that. And if the masters follow the guidance of the Scriptures, then there certainly wasn't going to be a problem. But the problem is whether or not people did that. Well, this centurion master of this particular slave clearly was not a callous master, was he? Here was someone that clearly cared about this slave that he had. This man that was his servant. He cared about him a great deal, and he's going to go to great lengths to try to make sure that this slave is taken care of, and that maybe, that he can be healed. Verse 3 says, when he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. Now I want us to deal with some confusion right here first. Because if you're reading Matthew's account, Matthew chapter 8, and verse 5 says this, and when Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him imploring. And there are people that have said, well, the Bible is an error there, because one place it says he sent Jewish leaders, another place says he came and asked Jesus. But there really isn't a problem with this. When we understand that culturally, if you sent a person to speak on your behalf, to give a message for you, it was you speaking to them. That's how they viewed it. Don't we see that in the Bible with angels? That an angel comes to them, but in the midst of the conversation is God saying, I, but it's not the angel I, is it? It's God speaking through His messenger. And it's God's message, so it's God speaking. And that's really what we're dealing with here. The man did not come personally, but his message was the message he wanted delivered by these Jewish elders. What do you see? Look at verse 3 with me for a moment. What do you see in verse 3 that is unusual and strange from a New Testament perspective, from a cultural perspective? Something that just, not the norm. Let's put it like that. Yes, you would. Yeah, that's it. I mean, that here are Jewish leaders delivering a message on behalf of, okay, number one, a Gentile. Let's make the whole list, right? Because there's a list here. First, he's a Gentile. Second, he's a Roman. Now, that's bad enough. If you're a Gentile and you're a Roman, that's bad. But he's a Roman soldier. That's even worse. And he's a Roman leader in the army. He's a ranking officer in the Roman army. That's even worse. And so here you got someone that really in Jewish society is despised by almost any Jew just because of the uniform or the armor he's wearing. And yet, we see this very unique situation here where these Jewish elders are speaking on his behalf. You know, we got to remember too. Yes, sir? Yes, we're going to come to that. Because they do. They think a lot of him. This isn't just, he pointed a sword at him and said, you better go tell Jesus. There's nothing like that. There's a relationship here. And it's a very friendly relationship, which is, yes. They have a great deal of respect for him. And I think we never need to forget that right now, at this point in Jewish society, in Palestine, we're 40 years from the Jewish rebellion. In fact, less than 40 years from the Jewish rebellion that will wind up destroying the nation of Israel and destroying the city of Jerusalem. So, kind feelings toward Roman soldiers, not real common. But it is here in this particular case. Well, he had 100 soldiers underneath him. And, he could have sent a soldier to Jesus, couldn't he? But he doesn't. He sends these Jewish elders to talk to him. The request comes from knowledge and a belief regarding Jesus. And, you have to ask yourself, how does this man know so much about Jesus? How does this man have the knowledge that he has, in regard to what Jesus can do, to the point that he has a real faith in Jesus' ability to do it? And I think the answer probably is the office that he occupies. I mean, for the city of Capernaum, not a very large city, you got a centurion there. You've got, his soldiers are probably spread out between Capernaum and maybe Magdala and Bethsaida along that coastline there. But, he's over them. And whatever is going on in Capernaum and in this area, those are things that this centurion, it's his responsibility to know what's going on. And you got a man that has shown up on the scene out of nowhere, and he's suddenly got thousands upon thousands of people gathering with him everywhere he goes. To the Romans, that's a problem, isn't it? How does a Roman soldier see thousands and thousands of people gathering around a man out in the wilderness? An army, yes. That's exactly how he sees it with his military mind. So it's incumbent upon him to find out what's going on, to go and investigate what is going on with this. He's probably one of the, maybe even the highest ranking officer in the Capernaum area. And maybe he would certainly be one of the ranking members of the area around Galilee. Well, he clearly had been told what Jesus was doing by however he got his information. Whether he sent people to find out, I'm sure that's probably the best way to have gathered it, to send someone, to see what this guy's saying, listen to what he's doing out here when he's talking to all these thousands of people. And we see that in John chapter 7 and verse 46 that can backfire, or that can actually turn a person to Jesus. The Pharisees send some officers. They send some soldiers. Now, they're not Roman soldiers, but they send some officers to take Jesus. Now, they're not just wanting to find out what he's talking about. They want him to actually go and take him. Well, they listen to Jesus, and they come back and they say, "Never has a man spoken as this man speaks." Right? Well, that kind of messed up. They didn't bring him back. They said, "Why didn't you bring him back?" Well, we couldn't bring back a man that talked like that. And so, if his men were giving him an honest report, and clearly they seem to have been doing that, then they were telling him that Jesus was not a threat. I wonder if there was a similar effect on the soldiers this centurion sent, as they also heard Jesus. I think, like Pilate, this man looked at Jesus objectively. He was willing to look at Jesus from a standpoint of really what the evidence says. He didn't just see a Jew, because a lot of time Romans saw a Jew and they didn't like Jews any more than Jews liked them. But yet he seemed to look at, had the ability to look at Jesus and see that he was not a threat. Same thing that Pilate was able to see, right? Pilate was able to see Jesus was not a threat. Jesus was not guilty. He was not a threat to Rome. He was not a threat to Caesar. It didn't take him long at all to figure that out as he saw him. He certainly knew that Jesus was not causing trouble, even though he had thousands of people following him. Power-minded people, thousands of people following him, that's a problem. If your goal is to obtain power, that becomes a problem real quick for the Romans. And we see that if you look over in Acts chapter 5, verses 35 through 39, and you listen to Gamaliel talking there in the Sanhedrin as they have brought the apostles in, and they're wanting to kill them, but Gamaliel kind of says, "Hold on, boys." Listen to what he says. "Men of Israel, take care of what you propose to do with these men. For some time ago, Theodotus rose up, claiming to be someone, and a group of about 400 men joined up with him." Well, see, now he became a problem. He had only 400. Jesus he fed 5,000 men. But he had only 400 men with him. He says he rose up, became a problem. And it says, "But he was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After this man, Judas of Galilee, rose up in the days of the census and drew away some people after him. He too perished, and all those who followed him were scattered." And then he goes on to tell them, so in this present case, it's best, if what these guys are doing is for men, it'll go away. But if it's of God, you can't stop it. The only thing you're going to find yourself doing is fighting against God. And isn't that exactly what they were doing? Gamaliel had such an insight. We'd have no reason to believe that he was a believer, but he was not so blinded as to ignore the realities of what he could see and what the apostles were doing as far as miracles go. He couldn't explain it, but it doesn't seem like Gamaliel could ignore it either. He had to at least give it some credence, and he seems to do that here. And there is an honesty in what Gamaliel says, and maybe that's where Paul got it. Paul had an honesty about him, didn't he not? Did he not? Even when he's persecuting Christians, he said, "I was doing it because I believed it was right. I wasn't doing it because I was just mean. I was doing it because I believed that was serving God." And there was an honesty about Paul. He wasn't a hypocrite. And, and when he was confronted with Jesus himself, there was enough honesty in Paul to turn away from it and to turn to what clearly he could see then as that which is right. So we see this centurion, and he has come to know Jesus in some way. It says, when they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue." Take note that these leaders are not making this request out of compulsion. That word earnestly there is they were zealously doing it. They wanted to do it. They desired to get this man the help that he wanted. This is not any kind of compulsion. They really like this guy. And they want to get Jesus to help him. You know, with what we know about Jewish leaders, I wonder if they were believers or just a part of those who were constantly trying to trap Jesus and cause trouble in the city of Capernaum. That was going on all the time at this point. You know, at this moment, they are forced to accept that Jesus is the only solution to the problem. And it actually could have been a little bit of a bitter pill for them to go to Jesus and ask him to do it. But they've seen him do it. They've seen him do these things. There's no denying that. They even bring sick people into the synagogue there in Capernaum, the synagogue that this Roman soldier had built. They bring sick people into the synagogue on the Sabbath day just to see what? If Jesus will heal on the Sabbath. So there is no doubt in their minds as to Jesus' power. We also see that they're making request on behalf of the centurion was from this actual respect that they had for him. He is worthy for you to grant this to him. He loves our nation. He built us our synagogue. You know, the respect does not come from the man's rank or position. It comes from the man's actions. Yeah, Doug.
Do you think that these are religious leaders or leaders of the city?
You know, being elders, they're probably the leaders of the city, but sometimes that's hard to differentiate within Jewish society. But you know, either way, you know, I think there's probably, when you see Jewish leaders, even the secular Jewish leaders, they're against Jesus as well. But I think probably the answer to your question is they're probably the elders of the city. They're not the rabbis. They're not the Pharisees necessarily, or the scribes. Because normally when the scriptures, when we're dealing with those guys, it says we're dealing with those guys, right? And the Pharisees came to him, or the scribes came to him. I mean, you know, it identifies those guys pretty clear. And this identifies them as elders, which would most likely be the leaders or the men that are respected there in the city of Capernaum. You know, the fact that he has earned their respect, that demonstrates something about him. That's the best kind of leader. Not the guy that is respected because he has a particular rank, but a guy that is respected because of the man that he is. That's always going to be the best leader that there is, and clearly he is that kind of person as we see him here. He is clearly making an effort to help the people that he is charged with watching and protecting. With all the pain that the Jews caused the Romans, this man, it says he loves our nation. Do you know what word is for love there? Agapio. It's not the friendly for love. It's agape love. He really cared. This was a sincere emotion that he had for the people or the nation. There is a goodness in this man that can separate the bad from the good people in a nation. There was a lot of reasons for Romans to hate Jews. I mean, they were in a de facto, most of the time, some degree of civil war with the Romans. And Roman soldiers didn't like them. Roman soldiers had to act completely different when they entered into Palestine because of some of the things that the Jews did not want. And so, you know, it was very easy to become jaded against all of them. And yet we still see people that struggle with that. I know a man who served in the Pacific, and knowing the things that I know historically of the Pacific War, it was a terrible, terrible thing. And the Japanese were incredibly brutal. But throughout his life, he never could be in a room with an Asian person. Doesn't matter if they were Japanese, Chinese, Korean, didn't matter. He could not be in a room with them. Couldn't be nice. Had no ability to differentiate from the bad of one person and someone else. And so this man clearly has that ability, and that's important for us to be able to differentiate as well, because in our world today, with all of the way that our world tries to segment people out into different groups, it's very easy to stereotype entire groups of people, everybody, not based on what they do, but based on some determination that someone's made. I wonder if the centurion, I just thinking about this today, I got to thinking, I wonder if the centurion knew that one of the 12 disciples of Jesus was a zealot. Zealots their business was killing Roman soldiers. Their business was killing Roman tax collectors. Anybody, any kind of sympathizer. They were the impetus of civil war. And yet, we have Simon the Zealot that is a part of Jesus' disciples. But, you know, that's the power of Jesus, isn't it? Because in that same group of disciples, there's Matthew the tax collector, right? And if they had met in a dark alley in Jerusalem, I don't know if Matthew would come out okay. I don't know how much that Simon was into the violence part of it, but they were certainly very violent in that area. Whether disciples or not, these men know that they cannot deny what Jesus can do, and his miracles are not ambiguous. They are quite clear. The Jewish leaders would acknowledge the miracles but refuse to accept Jesus as working from God oftentimes. In John chapter 9, we look at verses 24 through 25, and this is a story where you have Jesus healing the blind man. The blind man doesn't even know who Jesus is. Never sees Jesus. And they pull him aside and they want him to give God, they say, give God the glory. We know this man is a sinner. They can't stand the fact that Jesus will get credit for healing this man. You give God the credit, that man's a sinner. And this guy says, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. A little bit further down, beginning with verse 32, it says, since the beginning, he tells them again, since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And listen to their response. You were born entirely in sins, and are you teaching us? And they kicked him out of the synagogue. And what that means is that no one that was a part of that synagogue it's a Hebrew word that would go right along with church, or it's a term that goes right along with the way we use the word church. No one in that synagogue, that group of people that attended that synagogue, could have anything to do with him anymore. And they kicked him out. All because he just stated the truth about what Jesus could do. So among those that were in leadership positions, it was hard to find out. We have men like Joseph of Arimathea. We have Nicodemus. We have others that certainly, we're going to see Jairus in the city of Capernaum, who is a leader of the synagogue. And they are people who seem to be given to Jesus. Yes, sir.
27, don't you think it's interesting that the man's comment back to them that he says, do you want to become his disciples?
He slammed. Yeah, that was not something they should hear. That probably wasn't the wisest thing to say to him when you asked the Pharisees, you want to be a disciple of Jesus? I think that just made them madder. I'm pretty sure it did. But he did. I mean, he was incredibly, when you look at that exchange, he was incredibly insightful as to religious or spiritual things, and it's a very interesting exchange between him and the Pharisees. Verse 6 says, now Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house. Now Matthew 8:7 says that Jesus, before he started, he said, I will come and heal him. So Jesus acknowledges when they come to him and ask him to come heal this man's servant, Jesus says, I will come and heal him. And he gets up and he begins to go to the man's house. So he's willing to go to the centurion's home and heal his servant. And he begins the journey to his house. And this is no easy task. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 1 states that Jesus was being followed by a large crowd. Now that's just Jesus' daily life. Getting from here to there is not an easy thing. And, we're going to see that in a moment when we look at Jairus and the raising of his daughter and how the crowds, it says, were pressing on him. And we know about the woman there as he tries to go to that house to heal that or raise that young girl from the dead. It says, the centurion sent friends saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But just say the word. My servant will be healed. This is one of the most powerful people in this area. He is a direct conduit of the most powerful army and the most powerful empire in the world. And he is speaking to a homeless and relatively unknown Jewish rabbi in the middle of the backwoods area of the country. And he tells that man, I'm not worthy. I would love to know, I really would, the life journey this man went on to bring him to this point. I would love to know how this centurion went from where he was to here. I'd like to see how that played out. Too many Christians proudly think that Christ and His church need them, and they never realize that they're not worthy even to have Christ in their presence. They could learn from this soldier what real humility and real reverence is. It's not worthy for you to come under my roof, not worthy to meet you in person. Where does that kind of humility come from? I think it comes from honest faith in what Jesus has shown that He can and He will do. And that comes out in the phrase, you just say it and it'll happen. I mean, He recognizes this power, and I think He's in awe of it. And I think too often in our day, in our time, in the science and we know so much, and we've gone to the moon or whatever you want to put in that list, I think we've lost awe in God. This man had it. And when we lose awe in God, we lose reverence. When we lose reverence, we lose humility. And so I think we need to spend more time giving ourselves to thinking about God and finding that awe and how great He is. This man's understanding truly amazes me. How often do we doubt Jesus' ability to help in much smaller ways than this? How many times in my life have I said, I'm not sure Jesus is helping me with this, and I've let my face sag, and I'm not even talking about asking Him to heal somebody who's not even in the same building with them. And I fall below this man's level of faith. Verse 8 says, He says, For I also am a man under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, Go, and he goes, and to another, Come, and he comes, and to my slave, Do this, and he does it. See, a soldier understands authority. He does what he's told by the commander of his cohort. That's his commander. And the cohort commander, he obeys the commander of the legion. And the legion commander, he obeys the commander of the army. And the army commander, he obeys the emperor, right? There's what we call a chain of command here. And authority runs down that chain of command from the source of the emperor there in the Roman Empire. And for ours, it's certainly God. This centurion knew that the men under him would do as he said because he had the authority to tell them what to do. When he spoke with the power of Rome. And you better do it, or you'd be branded a traitor to Caesar. And so his point is that Jesus has authority. And that authority has been demonstrated. It's been demonstrated over sickness, over demons, over nature. At this point, He stilled the storm on the Sea of Galilee. You think that's gotten around? You think somebody's told somebody about Jesus stopping the storm on the Sea of Galilee? Because now they've seen all the other healing, right? The healing of the sick and things like that. That's been very visible. But the authority came from God above and was worked through Jesus, just like the centurion. That's exactly what Nicodemus said when he came to Jesus in John chapter 3, that no man can do the things you do except he be from God. Same thing the blind man was saying. I was blind and now I see. And who's the only one who can do that? God. He's the only one with that kind of authority or that kind of power. We can switch those two words out. Jesus had authority or power in His teaching, did He not? They said He taught as one having authority. You know, when He said, the law says this, but I say to you, that's speaking with authority. Because most of the time, teachers of that day would say, well, Rabbi Akiba, or Rabbi Hillel, or Rabbi Gamaliel said this, but they didn't say, I say it. But Jesus did. That's one speaking as one having authority. In the paralytic, which we're going to look at later, in Mark chapter 2, we see that Jesus says, so that you may know that the Son of Man has the power to forgive sin, or the authority to forgive sins. He proves to them that He can. He has authority over demons. John 17, as He prays to God there on the night before He goes to the cross, He talks about the fact that He has authority over all flesh. So Jesus was one that certainly had authority, and this Roman soldier recognized it. How did this Roman come to such an unbelievable and accurate understanding of Jesus? Because he seems to get him better than the ones that are with him every day. Verse 9 says, now when Jesus heard this, He marveled at him. I'll take that. I would love to find a day where Jesus marvels at me for something other than me being dumb. You know, Jeannie marvels at me all the time, but not for the right reasons. But I'd love to hear that said of me. He marveled at him and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. Isn't that amazing? Matthew 8:13, and Jesus said to the centurion, go, and it shall be done for you as you have believed. And his servant was healed that very moment. You know, it's something... it's an amazing thing to think about Jesus being amazed at someone. To impress God. You would think that the greatest faith in the Messiah would be in the nation of Israel, with the people that have been obsessed with His coming their entire lives. Right? That's where you think that would lie. And yet Jesus says, among all those people, He's still greater than them. I haven't found this kind of faith. I haven't found this kind of willingness to accept who I am by anybody in the nation of Israel. Jesus says that it is this great faith of this Gentile Roman soldier. You think Jesus probably offended somebody when He made that statement? I think He probably did. You know, as preachers, or at least I guess I'll speak from my standpoint, I kind of shy away from mentioning people by name because I'm always afraid I'm going to miss someone, and I don't want someone to get mad because I didn't mention them. And it's not because I don't appreciate them. It has nothing to do with that. But yet, I know that can be the case. Chris McCurley and I, we kind of got tickled because if they prayed for Chris, they throw me in real quick. Or if they prayed for me, they throw Chris in real quick. You know, I want to be with Nathan. We appreciate him. And Chris, you know. Or they did it for Chris. You don't have to do that. If you pray for Doug, I'll tell you what, I'm thankful for Doug myself. And I'm thankful for Chris. And you don't have to throw me in. I won't get upset, as I'll be thankful with you in the prayer with you for those guys and what they do. And so, you know, we don't. But I bet when Jesus said this, that there were some there that weren't very happy about that statement because it kind of condemned them. Jesus addresses this point about the Jews in Matthew chapter 8, verses 11 through 12, where He says, I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham and Isaac. This is what He says after this in regard to what the centurion has done. And recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So this statement that Jesus makes after healing this man's servant, this is for the crowds that surround him. This is for the Jewish leaders that are there. East and west is just a way of saying from all over the world. And they're going to come to the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where in the kingdom of heaven. And what is Jesus preaching? He's preaching the kingdom of heaven, right? He began to preach that the kingdom of heaven is what? At hand. And He is there to make that a reality. But that term, sons of the kingdom, is how the Jews describe themselves, and Jesus uses their language so that they knew exactly who He was talking about, that the sons of the kingdom would not make it. It was not how they, it's how the Jews described themselves, but it was not how they lived. They did not do the deeds of their father, as Jesus said in John chapter 8. And He says they will be cast out. We see parables along this same line, right? The parable of the vineyard, you remember that one? Where the master had a vineyard, right? And he rented it out to the guys, and he sent his servants to get his share, and they beat up the servants, and he said, I'll send my son. Surely they'll accept him, right? They kill him. And I love the text after that. Because in verse 45, it says, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was speaking about them. They didn't miss it. They got it. That they were not going to make it. That the vast majority, Jews, for the most part, were not going to obey. While there would be a large number, it would not be a majority of the nation by no means. Jesus sees this soldier as a foreshadowing of what is to come when the gospel is given to the Gentile world. I found it kind of interesting. I thought about it, that you have this centurion here, and then the first Gentile to have the gospel preached to him was also a Roman centurion as well. Masses of the Gentile world would accept Jesus while the majority of Jews would reject him. And they would actually become the greatest adversary to his spread, even among the Gentile world. I think there's an argument, a very solid argument, one of the better arguments, that the Jews are Paul's thorn in the flesh. That they are that which kept him from proclaiming himself fully. Because everywhere he goes, the Jews followed right behind him and messed it up, didn't they? They'd cause a riot. They'd mess things up all over the place. And so we see that they became the adversary instead of the children. Verse 10 says, when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. Jesus tells the centurion that this was done according to his faith, and it happens immediately. Jesus respects the man's wishes and honors his request. Would have been more visible if Jesus had went, right? Gone there and put his hand on him. Everybody could have seen that. The crowd could have been there, right? But Jesus respected the man's request. Jesus could have said, well, I'm coming anyway. You said I'm a man of authority, I'm telling you I'm coming. But Jesus respected the man and his request and did not go to the house. We need to do that as well. We need to listen to people. We need to respect what they say. And when they, I've talked to people, family members, they say, I don't want to talk about it. And I respect that choice. They have a right to make that choice. I hope the door opens again someday, but I'm not going to keep trying to kick the door down. Because all I'll do in that situation is ruin any chance of ever having an opportunity to bring them to Christ.
Have to be there.
No.
Like our so-called faith leaders today.
No, yeah. Well, this isn't even his first long distance one. The nobleman's son, the second miracle in the Galilee area, was from a great distance, a long distance. And so, Jesus has already shown he can. I don't know if the centurion had that knowledge. I mean, we don't know what he knew. But, Jesus certainly showed he doesn't have to be in physical proximity. That doesn't matter with him at all. Yes, sir?
It also proves the centurion's faith.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, most people think he's got to be here, right? He's got to touch me. Or he's got to touch whoever it is. But this guy doesn't even think that way. And that's very different from pretty much anyone else. And that probably comes from the fact that he does have this much greater faith. When we look at the works of Jesus, we need to learn of him and then trust him to care for us by his power and authority, not by how we think it should be done. And may we always be reverently humble in and out of the presence of Jesus. I don't know that we're ever out of the presence of Jesus, but I put out there just because, just to cover the bases. Go over to Luke chapter 8, verses 40 through 56. And I want us to look real quick at Jairus' daughter. I got 10 minutes for a much longer text. I don't know how that's going to happen. Yeah, Doug's already laughing. And what happened there? Jesus is returning. It says and the people welcomed him there. There's large crowds over there. Where he's returning from is he's coming from having gone to the area of Gerasene and having cast out the demon, the demonic there, the legion. And he has returned now, having crossed back across the Sea of Galilee. And it says that there came a man here, and we were in Capernaum again. And there came a man named Jairus, and he was an official of the synagogue, and he fell at Jesus' feet and began to implore him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, and she was dying. But as he went, the crowds were pressed against him. Jairus is not a rabbi. Jairus is the leader of the synagogue. He went out and got the rabbis. Okay, he ran the synagogue. And so this is a man of quite a bit of influence, quite a bit of religious influence, and probably as well as political influence in the area that he's in. It does not tell us whether he was a disciple of Jesus before. Again, here's a person that cannot deny what he's seen Jesus do, right? Boy, let me tell you what, when things hit home, when things are at home, when they're personal, it kind of opens our eyes to some things that maybe we were closing them to before, right? His child's sick. I don't know what he thought about Jesus before this moment, but I can tell you what he's thinking about Jesus right now. I've seen what he did with all those other people. And I believe he can do that with my daughter as well. My little girl, as he calls her. As he calls her his little daughter in Mark chapter 5, verse 23. So Jesus got up and he went with him. And once again, the crowds, they were pressing upon him, Mark tells us. Jesus' daily life was so difficult. Just getting from here to there was just a press against and push against people constantly. And it says that while this is going on, we have two things going on here in one narrative, right? Because while he's trying to get to this little girl, it says, and a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and could not be healed by anyone was there, right? And in the midst of this, here comes this woman, and there's an incredible contrast. You have a man of great influence, and you have a woman who's an outcast. And I say she's an outcast, number one, because she's a woman, but number two, and ladies, I'm talking about in New Testament times. Number two, this hemorrhage, almost anywhere that you look, anything that you read about in regard to the language here, this is a menstrual issue. Some believe brought on by anemia. And that makes her, according to the law of Moses, unclean. And so she is not a person that's going to be allowed to be around people very much at all. And, the fact that she's in this crowd, probably just the chaos of the crowd is the only reason she's able to be where she is at without someone taking note. Maybe they don't know who she is because, Jesus has already healed. It seems like he's healed everybody in the Capernaum area long before this. We've had, where it says they've all brought their sick and he healed them all. So, we got people coming from other places as well. And so we don't even know that she's from this local area, so they may not have known about her problem. But she is religiously and culturally unclean. Mark tells us that she had endured much difficulty at the hands of physicians and had literally given everything that she had, and it had only gotten worse. So she's broke and she's sick. And you got a contrast here. You got the religious elite and the religious outcast, the respected man Jairus, the avoided woman, man and woman, but you also have some similarities. Both are in hopeless situations. Both know that Jesus can help. Both have come to Jesus seeking help. I also found it interesting. I don't guess I've noticed it before. I don't know, you don't know why you don't notice things, but she's had this disease as long as that daughter's been alive. The daughter's 12 years old. She's had this disease, this problem, for 12 years. It says she came up behind him and touched. If you could go ahead and flip that to that next screen. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. Luke is a little brief with his record, but Matthew 9:21 tells us that she said to herself, "If I only touch his garment, I will get well." I don't know where she got that idea, but she had it. That was her thing. If I could just get close enough to touch him. And I wonder how far she came for this healing. I wonder how hard it was for her to fight her way through the crowd. They were building a cathedral in Magdala for the women of the Bible, and it was had all these different murals, but this was one of them. And the whole room, that picture is like everything between these two doors. It was huge. And it's of Jesus' feet and a woman's hand reaching in, just trying to get close. I thought that was a powerful picture of just trying to get to Jesus. But I love what happens next. Here's all this crowd around him, right? And Jesus goes, "Whoa, who touched me?" I mean, probably everybody's touching him. There were probably like 6 people touching him at that moment, all around him. But who touched me? And I get a little bit perturbed at Peter and the disciples because they almost seem like they're a little disrespectful, don't they? To Jesus? Man, there's a big crowd around here. Listen to what Mark 5, here's what they say. You see the crowd pressing around in on you, and you say, who touched me? I mean, my mama would have spun my head if I'd have talked to her like that. I'll tell you what. What do you mean? Look at all these people, and you're asking us who touched you? Come on. Well, when the woman saw... Well, let me say one other thing before I go there. Jesus says, someone did touch me, for I was aware that power had gone out of me. You know, we should never get the idea that this happened without Jesus doing it. You know, that, it outshot a miracle, and he didn't, she touched him and the miracle shot out, and he didn't have anything to do with it. No, he knew exactly what was going on. He knew she was there. And the question in his statement was to better acknowledge the faith that he felt in that touch and that power. Jesus fills our faith like this woman, and he exerts power upon it. Isn't it amazing that her touch he felt? And that was her faith. But when the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling and fell down before him and declared in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. You know, this poor woman, she's now come to this realization that they know that something's up, right? She didn't get away with just reaching in and touching him. Maybe that was the whole plan all along. Maybe it was the fact that she was unclean and that no man would touch her, especially a religious man. And so I'm just going to touch him. He'll never know it. Maybe that's it. She realizes she ain't gotten away with that, right? She turns around, she owns it. I touched him. I did it, and this is why. Thinking that she's in trouble. Bless her heart. Jesus said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. You know, Jesus tells her in Matthew to take courage in the faith that she has. Telling her she doesn't have any need to be afraid any longer. Well, real quick, have you thought about Jairus at this moment? He's trying to get Jesus to his daughter that's dying. Don't forget, he's right there, right? What's he doing? Because here we've stopped. Jesus asks, who's touched me? Peter and them are going, what do you mean, who's touched you? And the woman now stops, turns around, tells her whole story about what she's done. Jesus is still talking to her. What's going on with Jairus' daughter? By the time Jesus finished speaking, somebody walks up and goes, she's dead. Don't you know Jairus is going, why have we stood here and waited for this? This wasn't nearly as important as my daughter. I want you to look at what Jesus says to him. Verse 50. When Jesus heard that the daughter was dead, he doesn't say anything to anybody. He looks to Jairus. Do not be afraid any longer. Only believe and she will be made well. Do you get what Jesus is saying right there? You need to keep your eyes on the ball, Jairus. Stay focused. Keep your belief. I know the rug has just been yanked out from under you. You feel like you've just been kicked in the gut. You stay with me. You stay focused right here. Reminds me of Peter on the water, right? Keep your eyes on me. I know it's stormy all around you. And I think all of us can understand Jairus' issue right now. But Jesus looks at him and says, you keep focused. Go to the house. One of the accounts tells us that, Mark's account tells us that Jesus actually made the crowd leave the house. I find that interesting. I want to hit this just before we leave because I know the bell rung. But Jesus makes everybody leave. He only takes in Peter, James, and John, right? And the parents. And I ask myself, why? Why does he push the people out? Why does he not let them in there? And part of me thinks it's a child. Last thing that child needs to wake up to is people all around her. Jesus had a special place for children. He raises her from the dead. Little child rise. And he tells them, feed her. Mom and Dad, you got something to do now. You got to be Mom and Dad. Go feed her. See, Jesus was thinking about family. He tells them not to tell anybody. And I don't really... Jesus doesn't tell us why. Part of me thinks that little girl would have a pretty hard life if everybody wanted to see the little girl that came back from the dead. And Jesus didn't want her to go through that. There may have been, I don't know. I don't think it's aspects of what Jesus doesn't want people to know that he can do. He's already raised the widow of Nain's son. This isn't the first time he's raised someone from the dead. So it's not the raising of the dead, but maybe it is her age. And Jesus cares. And he understands those things. He's not just running around doing miracles for the sake of miracles. He cares about the people he's healing. But this mother and this father had great faith. Even though he told them not to say anything, the Bible still tells us it spread all over the lands. It was kind of hard to keep these things secret. Some people already knew that she was dead before Jesus came in. Let's conclude our class with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your word. We thank you that it has so much to give to us and to teach us how to live and to be pleasing to you, Father. We pray that we will take your words and that we will put them into our hearts and live them in our daily lives, Father. Father, we pray that you help each and every one of us to have the kind of faith that we see in these people and that interacted with your Son while he was upon this earth, Father. And pray that you help us to be those people. Pray that you go with us now and that you protect us. Pray that you be with Brother Gene in the morning and that you bless him and strengthen him and that you be with the doctors and the nurses that are ministering to him and that you bless them. We pray these things in Christ's holy name. Amen.